That question had been asked thousands of times on Family Feud, but none had ever ended like this. Margaret's trembling voice filled the studio. You look just like my Johnny." Steve Harvey froze, because the 72-year-old woman was now seeing her dead son in his face. The cameras were rolling, but nobody thought this moment would ever make it to television. The Family Feud studio hummed with its usual electric energy that Tuesday afternoon. Bright lights cut through the carefully orchestrated chaos, illuminating the iconic game board that had witnessed countless dreams, victories, and heartbreaks. The audience buzzed with anticipation. 300 strangers united by their shared love of television's most beloved family game. Children clutched homemade signs. Grandparents adjusted their glasses to get a better view, and teenagers secretly recorded everything on phones they weren't supposed to have. Steve Harvey stood at center stage, his charcoal gray suit impeccable, his signature mustache perfectly groomed, microphone in hand, like a conductor's baton ready to orchestrate another round of television magic. Behind him, the production crew moved with practiced efficiency, camera operators finding their angles, sound technicians adjusting levels, producers watching monitors with the focused intensity of air traffic controllers. The Williamson family had taken their positions on the left side of the stage, 5 generations of laughter and love, squeezed into matching blue polo shirts. Margaret stood second in line, her silver hair carefully styled, her hands clasped tightly in front of her floral dress. At 72, she was the family matriarch, the one who had insisted they apply for the show. One last adventure, she had told her daughter just months ago, back when the words came easier and the names stayed where they belonged. Her grandson, Michael, had been the one to fill out the application online. "Grandma deserves this," he had written in the essay portion. She raised 6 kids, survived the loss of her oldest son, and still makes the best apple pie in 3 counties. If anyone deserves to win some money on Family Feud, it's her. What he hadn't written, what none of them could bring themselves to say out loud, was that they all knew this might be her last chance to experience something like this. The disease was patient but relentless, taking small pieces of her each day.
"Survey says we've got a great show for you today." Steve's voice boomed across the studio, drawing cheers from the audience. His energy was infectious, practiced, comfortable. This was his domain, his rhythm, his dance with America's families that he had perfected over decades of television. The opposing team, the Chen family, bounced on their toes with nervous excitement. The scoreboard glowed zeros on both sides, waiting to chronicle another battle of quick wit and family dynamics. Steve moved between the families with the ease of a man who had done this thousands of times, cracking jokes, setting everyone at ease. But something was different today, though no one could name it yet. Margaret's daughter, Susan, kept glancing at her mother with concern that she tried to hide behind forced smiles. The early-stage Alzheimer's had been progressing slowly, stealing little pieces of her mother's world, one memory at a time. Some days were better than others. Today had started as a good day. All right, Steve clapped his hands together, the sound sharp in the studio air. "Let's get this party started. We surveyed 100 people, and we asked them." He paused for dramatic effect, his eyes scanning both families. "What is your most precious memory?" The question hung in the air like a gentle benediction. It was meant to be heartwarming, the kind of question that would elicit sweet stories about first kisses, wedding days, or children's births. Safe television, predictable responses. Margaret stepped forward when her turn came, her movements careful but determined. The lights seemed brighter suddenly, almost ethereal, casting a warm glow around her silver hair. She looked up at Steve, and for a moment time suspended itself in the space between them. Her eyes, clouded with the confusion that came and went like weather patterns, focused on Steve's face with startling intensity. The studio noise faded to a whisper. The audience sensed something shifting, the way animals sense an approaching storm. In that crystalline moment, the boundaries between past and present dissolved completely. And Margaret was no longer a 72-year-old woman on a game show. She was a young mother again, seeing her beloved son after an impossible absence. "You." Margaret's voice was soft, almost reverent. Her hand reached out tentatively,
stopping just short of touching Steve's cheek. The gesture was so tender, so full of longing, that several audience members found themselves holding their breath. "You look just like my Johnny." Steve's practiced smile faltered. The microphone suddenly felt heavy in his hand. Around them, the studio held its collective breath. "My Johnny," Margaret repeated, her voice growing stronger, more certain. "My beautiful boy. You have his eyes, his smile." She stepped closer, her maternal instincts overriding the bright lights and cameras and the hundreds of watching eyes. "Where have you been, sweetheart? I've been waiting for you." The silence stretched, thick and profound. Steve Harvey, the man who had made a career out of quick comebacks and perfect timing, found himself speechless. This wasn't in any script. This wasn't part of the show. Margaret's family watched from the sidelines, Susan's hand covering her mouth, tears already forming. They had known this might happen. The doctors had warned them about the confusion. The way past and present could blur together in her mind. But seeing it happen here, under these lights, in front of all these people— "Mom," Susan whispered, starting to move forward, but something in Steve's posture stopped her. Steve looked into Margaret's eyes and saw not confusion, but pure, undiluted love. The kind of love that transcends time and circumstance, and the cruel tricks that disease plays on the human mind. In that moment, he wasn't Steve Harvey, television host. He was Johnny, whoever Johnny was, to this woman who needed him to be. Slowly, Steve lowered the microphone to his side. The audience, sensing the sacred nature of what was unfolding, fell completely silent. Even the camera operator seemed to move with more reverence, instinctively understanding that they were witnessing something beyond entertainment. "I'm here now," Steve said quietly, his voice barely carrying beyond Margaret, but somehow reaching every corner of the studio. "I'm right here." Margaret's face lit up with joy so pure it was almost painful to witness. "Oh, Johnny, I knew you'd come back. I knew it." She reached out and took Steve's free hand in both of hers, her grip surprisingly strong. "I have so much to tell you, so much you've missed." But then something flickered in her eyes, a moment of clarity breaking through like sunlight through storm clouds. She looked around the studio, seeing it as if for the first time, the lights, the cameras, the audience watching with rapt attention. Confusion replaced certainty, and Steve watched the devastating moment when Margaret remembered where she was. "I'm sorry," she whispered, her cheeks flushing with embarrassment. "I thought you were— I'm so sorry." She tried to pull away, but Steve gently held her hands. "Don't apologize," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "Don't ever apologize for love." The rehook hit the audience like a wave. Here was Steve Harvey, master of comedy and quick wit, speaking with the tenderness of a son to a mother he'd never met. The contradiction was beautiful and heartbreaking, and nobody could look away. Margaret looked up at him again, and though the confusion had returned, something else remained. A deep, abiding warmth. "You're very kind," she said. "You remind me of someone I love very much." Her voice was steadier now, as if the love she carried for Johnny was stronger than any disease that tried to steal her memories. In the control room, the director watched the monitors, with tears streaming down his face. "Keep the cameras rolling," he whispered to his crew. "Whatever happens, we keep rolling." This wasn't just television anymore. It was documentation of something holy. "Tell me about him," Steve said, and the microphone became irrelevant. This was no longer a game show. This was a moment of pure human connection, broadcast to millions, but somehow feeling as intimate as a bedside conversation. The studio lights seemed to soften, as if even the technology understood the sacredness of what was unfolding. "Johnny was my first," Margaret said, her voice steady now. "Born when I was just 19. He had the biggest smile and he laughed at everything. Even as a baby, he was always laughing." Her eyes grew distant, traveling back through decades. He was going to be a teacher, loved children, loved books. He was everything good in this world. Steve felt the studio audience leaning forward, hanging on every word. The Chen family, their opponents just moments ago, watched with tears in their eyes. The game had stopped mattering entirely. What happened to him? Steve asked gently, though part of him already knew the answer would break something in the room. Vietnam, Margaret said simply. He was 22. Never got to teach those children. Never got to have children of his own. She looked up at Steve again, and this time her smile was both heartbroken and grateful. But for just a moment there, he was back. Thank you for giving me that. The silence that followed was profound and sacred. Steve felt tears he didn't even know were coming streaming down his face. In 30 years of television, he had never experienced anything like this. Margaret had given him a gift he didn't know he needed, the chance to be someone's son again, even if just for a moment. Without thinking, without considering the cameras or the audience, or the show that had ground to a halt, Steve pulled Margaret into a gentle embrace. She fit perfectly against his shoulder, and for those few seconds, time stopped entirely. In his arms, she felt like every mother who had ever loved and lost, every woman who had given everything for her children and asked for nothing in return. Steve thought of his own mother, of the way she used to hold him when he was small and scared. He thought of the mothers in his audience every day, the ones who watched his show while folding laundry or making dinner, the ones who deserved to see their love reflected back at them on television. Margaret had become all of them in this moment, and he had become every son who wished he could give his mother just one more day of happiness. Thank you, he whispered into her silver hair. Thank you for letting me be Johnny. The words came from somewhere deeper than his professional persona, from the place where all his own losses and loves lived quietly, waiting for moments like this to emerge and remind him why he was really here. When they separated, Margaret looked at him with clear eyes, lucid and present. You're not Johnny, she said with a small smile, but you have a kind heart. That's what I saw. That's what reminded me of him. The audience erupted into applause, but it wasn't the typical game show applause. It was the kind of clapping that comes from deep in the chest, the kind that says, thank you for showing us what it means to be human. People wiped their eyes openly, no longer caring about being on camera. In the front row, an elderly man reached for his wife's hand, thinking of their own son lost to war. Across the studio, a young mother pulled her toddler closer, suddenly understanding the preciousness of every ordinary moment. Steve wiped his eyes and picked up the microphone again, but his voice was different now, softer, more vulnerable. Ladies and gentlemen, Margaret Williamson. The applause grew louder, and Margaret waved with the grace of someone who had just shared the most precious thing she owned. The show would go on. Points would be scored, families would compete, and eventually someone would win. But everyone in that studio knew they had already witnessed the only victory that mattered that day. As the Williamson family gathered around their matriarch, Steve caught Susan's eye. She mouthed thank you to him, and he nodded, understanding passing between them like a secret. Margaret might forget this moment by tomorrow, or even by tonight, but everyone else would remember it forever. The cameras kept rolling, but they had captured something that transcended television. They had captured the moment when a game show became a meditation on love, loss, and the mysterious ways that strangers can become family in the space of a heartbeat. Steve looked out at the audience one more time before continuing with the show. You know what, folks? He said, his voice still thick with emotion. Sometimes Family Feud isn't about the families competing. Sometimes it's about the family we all become, right here, right now. That day, Margaret Williamson didn't win the game, but she had given everyone present something far more valuable than any prize money could buy. She had reminded them that love doesn't diminish with age or disease, and that sometimes the most precious memories are the ones we create with complete strangers who for just a moment become everything we need them to be. As the credits rolled and the studio lights dimmed, Margaret was still smiling, still holding the memory of seeing her Johnny one more time. Her family surrounded her, protective and proud, understanding that they had just witnessed their mother at her most beautiful, not despite her illness, but in the way her love transcended it. Steve Harvey walked off that stage forever changed, carrying with him the weight and privilege of having been loved so completely by someone he had just met. He would go home that night and call his own mother just to hear her voice. He would hug his children a little tighter and remember that every day on television was a chance to honor the Margaret Williamsons of the world, the mothers and fathers and grandparents who watched and hoped and loved with everything they had left. In the months that followed, Margaret's condition would worsen, and she would forget many things. But Susan swore that sometimes, when the light hit her mother's face just right, she would smile and mention the nice man on television who reminded her of Johnny. Love, it seemed, was the last thing the mind was willing to release. Television had stopped being entertainment that day. It had become a testament to the enduring power of a mother's love and the beautiful ways that human hearts can recognize each other across any distance, any difference, any barrier that life puts between them. And somewhere in America, another mother watching at home held her own memories a little closer, grateful for the reminder that love never truly dies. It just waits for the right moment to shine through.